Hello and welcome to our final episode of season two, Mordred's community Anbennar multiplayer little political chat here for you. Joined as always by Archmill. Arch, how's it going?
Things are going well. How are you?
I'm doing well. So here we are, 1705. Uh, the war between the Phoenix Empire and Vern rages on. A new war between the Lake Federation and its cavalry buddies in the Ram Dwarves and Adenica versus Bjarnrik and Laurent continues.
Indeed.
Our great power list, full of players for the most part. Boy Scarvo obviously was a player up until the end. And then same with Airdan. But besides that, we have Phoenix Empire, number one. I don't think any surprise there, really.
Not
Lake
really.
Fed, number two. Vern climbed quite a bit those final few weeks through the development of its colonial nations. So sitting at number three,
Hmm.
Airdan number four, Bjarnrik five, Laurent six, Chaos, Boyascarvo. Any surprises here at the end of the season with our great powers?
I think I'd say Aordand, just for the fact that for the last couple of sessions they were being played by either an AI or a sub. So they've managed to hold on quite well. Um, so that is something that was interesting. I would have. I'm not sure if I would say I expected other people to take that place, or let's just put it this way: I'd expected perhaps an Eberthil to seize upon the opportunity to take more from that territory. Um, Similarly, perhaps a Malakner to do the same. But then again, we also haven't had our Malakner player for the last couple of sessions, so
Yeah,
that could
it's
also have been part of it.
interesting to note because Eberthil was otherwise occupied for much of the session. The AI took advantage and declared on its colonial nation in the Haraf area
Hmm.
and ate it, so gained quite a bit of dev through that. Um, was interesting to see at the end of it all how few colonial nations,
Yeah,
or how small the colonial nations of Eberthil ended up
I agree.
compared to Vern, for example, still with Sorun, Emmer, Dan, Drakesguard, etc.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to spend a little time, do some superlatives, if you will, just discuss the season overall. And it's a U4, it's a grand strategy game. No better place to start it off than what was your favorite war from this season?
Oh wow, my favorite war. That's a difficult one. I think it would be. Um, I don't know what this war was about, but it was Laurent, small country Danica against, was it Bjarnik and Arbran? It was like session 4 or 5. The Wood Elves had come in multiple times against Danica and Marhold already. Um, and then this is of course from my personal experience uh, when kind of Laurent came to Adenica's rescue, uh, especially because small country and Adenica had it rough for a while. Uh, so yeah, that would have been my favorite war. I would have expected the League War to be more interesting, but that was a bit of a doozy, unfortunately. Uh, though it was well timed for other players to seize upon that moment and that opportunity to, yeah, to do some expansion of their own. What was your favorite war, if I may ask?
Yeah, so favorite war I participated in would be Laurent and Vern versus Bjarnrik and Arboran, a few other players at different times, um, whether it was Boyascarvo or Small Country getting involved. But that was definitely my favorite war that I participated in. And
Mm.
then the favorite war from just an overall perspective, it was that Arboran
Against the Wood Elves?
Kvaria
Yeah,
war against the Wood Elves early on. So after the Wood Elves
yeah.
attacked Marhold and Adenica, and then Arboran came back in, and there was that just brutal slugfest back and forth. I thought that was a really dynamic and interesting war. Um,
Yeah,
Watching the streams afterwards, it was a great one to see.
I can see that. Yeah, it was a lot of scheming going on there, and that's also what made it interesting. I'd say, just back and forth, nobody really knowing where to stand. Uh, Very interesting. I agree.
And then next, I wanted to ask you, what was um, the nation that you felt had the best role play throughout the season, or the most interesting from a Anbennar lore perspective and how they played their nation?
Uh, that's that's very difficult to say. I must admit already straight from the bat that I think the role playing aspect of this season was way less pronounced than it was in the first season. Um, initially, I think about Small Country. I think as one of the heavy RP nations, just the way they've, um, especially at the start, you know, served the halfling cause, so to say. They immediately approached me in Adenica about Newshire, for instance. That was something that was already something they were very proactive with, and the way they lended their mercenaries out left, right, and center, so straight out of the gate, was something that I found very interesting, and not just mercenaries, but subsidies as well. So they're, you know, them using financial means to influence the game felt very much in character of how a halfling would play. Um, so yeah, I'd say that. Uh, what would be yours?
I'm gonna go with Abencost. So they played very tall, as you can
Hmm.
see from the dev across their island of Damesir. Um, you look at their mission tree, and they were actually able to complete their entire mission tree by the
True.
final session. And granted, their mission tree is a little bit easier to complete in a multiplayer because it is so heavily focused on the single province of
Yeah.
Abencost, but still was pretty cool to see them click that button, complete the city of the world's desire. You look at the various cultures that they have in
Mm-hmm.
Abencost, it's pretty funny, pretty impressive to see that they were able to get so many. And then they played tall, they played economic rather than
Mm.
military. It was good to see. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Throughout the season, just to latch on what you're saying there, throughout the season they have been that the Amicos player has been very proactive to fish for all the different races to get to live in Abacos to make sure the different events that cause those pops to spawn that they happened. So yeah, I'd agree with you there. Probably also an honorary mention for the Vern player. Um, their roleplay was a little bit difficult to keep track of, as was with all their Diplo, and having a null military felt like an odd choice from a roleplay perspective. But then again, the Imperial side of things, I think they handled quite well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think they stayed true to that for the most part. Only participated in maybe one or two wars against another member of the Empire.
Hmm.
So that was pretty impressive. And then tried to stay true to expanding the Empire wherever possible. Um, was nice to see. Biggest surprise from the season. So here we are, 1705. What country is around that you wouldn't have expected? Who would you have expected that did not make it? Um,
Oh,
what caught you most off guard over the course of the season?
um, well, I mean, first of all, that Adenica and Marhold are still alive is a miracle, considering, uh, yeah, what kind of situation they were. Um, and that's partially because of the Wood Elf player at a certain moment not showing up. But already before that, both Marhold and Adenica went through some hoops to get support from basically anywhere they could to stay alive, and it happened. But I'd like to hark back to something that went on. I think it was in a second or third session already, and that's our Rail Skulker player dropping, and Orla Zamasdir, the Ramsteel Dwarfs, winning out in that first uh, death war that we've seen there. Uh, I was kind of surprised there. I expected the Ramsteel Dwarfs to lose there. Uh, Railskulker was looking very intimidating, but yeah, they were too cautious in getting the occupations on Orla Zemesdir. Orla Zemesdir managed to take it back through willpower alone, I'd say, and a lot of mercs. And well, Orla Zemesdir is still around, and Railskulker is not. I was surprised by that.
Yeah, I'd say that's a great one, actually. I hadn't even thought of that. Um, the other surprise to me is actually the number of AI left in the Empire. Quite surprising, to be honest. You don't
Little
really
strict.
see that at 1700 in many multiplayer games. If
No,
anywhere, it may be like somewhere in the New World or um, something like that. Rehen, obviously, because so few
yeah,
players are playing over there. But yeah, AI in the Empire, interesting to see.
for sure. I wonder why as well, but that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah. And then on a similar vein, um, what country was most interesting for you to see this season? Maybe it's someone that we didn't see last season. Maybe it was a interesting set of ideas or mission tree
Hmm.
because the new patch introduced so many. Uh, what new thing interested you the most this season?
That's a difficult uh that's a difficult question actually. Um,
If
on the
you'd
one
like, I
hand,
can go first.
to go first, yeah, no, go ahead.
So I think from a multiplayer perspective, it was quite interesting to see a new dynamic with the Lake Federation rather than the Centaurs.
Yeah.
Um, that whole region, I think, is very interesting from a single player perspective.
Hmm.
And we struggled last season, I think, to find any real balance with the Centaurs. And I think once again, we've struggled with the Lake Federation. It
Yeah.
seemed for a little while that oh, they were just slowly growing, doing their own little thing. But then when you clicked on the mission tree and you saw how
Hmm.
far they had come, and then instantly became this huge power, wiped the ogres off with little chance for the ogres to do anything about it. Um,
Indeed.
I thought that was pretty interesting. Um, it's going to continue to be a region that's going to be difficult to find balance from a multiplayer perspective.
Personally, I'd say it's impossible to find balance there. At least until maybe there's more content added, and like fake China, but particularly directly to the east of the Lake Fed, because as it stands right now, it's I'm not even going to consider the ogres if I'm honest in a multiplayer setting. It's you know um, either if you're going to have a centaur player or a lake fed player, if you have both, then one of them is going to win, and they're going to dominate the entire region and be a superpower. And I think until there are new dynamics introduced, that's going to be the way it is, unfortunately. Um, that was something that I remarked. Another interesting thing was to see a Vanrahar, a Harimari nation. Was very strong. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see too much of them. At least I didn't. They were involved in a lot of the Phoenix Empire's wars, but it's a shame that they became a vassal or marched specifically under the Phoenix Empire, and that we didn't see an independent Vendrahar be part of the bulwark against the Phoenix Empire. Um, so that was a bit of a shame. Other than that, it was interesting to see more um, newer players this season. um, but again, as with last season, it felt a little bit stalematey. Um, there was more colonial play this season than previous season, but it again, and I'll just reiterate, it felt a little bit stalematey and little reason for the players to go after each other, and that was unfortunate, I'd say.
Yeah, colonial play in New Worlders and those dynamics, they're tough, especially because naval combat can become so lopsided, depending
Hmm.
on national ideas. It almost makes sense to find a naval power and develop a symbiotic relationship with them if you're going colonial, rather
Yeah,
than um, hostile or confrontational, because they can just blockade your New World holdings and make it a very difficult life for you. I wish there was a better way to um, encourage competition amongst colonizers.
you're absolutely right. Uh, but that's something that's just a problem in vanilla as well, right? So that's just the game as it stands right now, unfortunately.
Yep, I'd agree.
Um, Other
Any
than that, and
superlatives you'd like to recognize or any other topics you'd like to discuss here in our little recap?
I'm probably the most interesting turnabout of diplomacy is probably Arbran. uh, Seeing how well the player switched and the immediate switching of priorities was interesting to see, uh, and it's an interesting reminder to the how much having a player and the kind of player um, influences where a nation can go, even in a setting where we're doing a little bit more role play oriented. Uh, until the 1600s, players were a little bit railroaded, even um, having to stick to their mission trees, and how two different people can take a tag in such different directions is remarkable. So that's something I wanted to address for sure, uh, because the game would have looked very differently uh, if that didn't happen. For instance.
Yeah, that's definitely very true and very interesting to note. Um, yeah, it's always a shame to lose a player mid-season and have to reconfigure, rejigger diplomacy, but
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting reminder of how dynamic things can be
Mm-hmm.
if players don't view diplomacy as a season long
Mm-hmm.
endeavor and more of a session to session. Things
Yeah,
can get quite spicy.
for sure, exactly. Also, probably most daunting would be Vern. Uh, I am surprised how they kept up with their insane amount of force limit and manpower. I mean, yeah, it can all be explained through their ideas, their colonies, uh, yada yada yada. But that last set of wars, from the New World to against Laurent and Bjarnik, against the Phoenix Empire, I'm astounded they're still standing and looking quite healthy at that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. You look at the game that they played, they chose a path that was incredibly dependent on their diplomatic prowess, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you look at their force limit, it's extremely dependent upon um, the contributions from their colonies. If you look at
Mm-hmm.
their economy, it's extremely dependent upon the subsidies from their allies. And
Yeah.
then the power that they're able to project because they maintain those relationships with their close allies, because they maintain dominance of the New World, was very impressive. And obviously, there'll be some tweaks going into season 3 from the idea
For
groups,
sure.
but
For sure.
Circling
But
back
yeah.
to that, this is our first season playing with a different idea group as a community, either in vanilla or Anbennar.
Hmm.
How do you feel about the ideas versus vanilla ideas?
Way better already, I'd say. But definitely more tweaks required for sure. Um, Desired by myself also, but then again, you always have that issue where, one person may have particular ideas versus the other. Um, but this was a definite improvement over vanilla ideas. That's for sure. Uh, I think uh, personally, it's incredibly boring if just to see everyone go quantity economic, quality trade as sort of like their go-to thing to do. Um, so yeah, uh, we've seen a lot more variation in ID groups. There were still a couple that definitely stood out as better picks by and large. So there's definitely some tweaking that can be done there, and yeah, there's still some things like vassal force limit that Vern took excellent advantage of that definitely need some tweaking. But all in all, very pleased with how the mod for the ID groups turned out.
Well, Arch, it was great catching up with you again, and look forward
Yep.
to seeing you on the battlefield in season 3.
See you in season 3. Looking forward to it.
Have a good one.
So yeah.